A son abandons his elderly mother, hungry and alone, on a city park bench. But what happens next will leave you speechless. The morning felt heavy in New York City. The sky hung low and gray, threatening rain, yet the humid heat still clung to Union Square like a damp blanket. Helen sat on a worn wooden bench, her hands trembling as they clutched a torn plastic bag holding a few old clothes. She was 73 years old, white, messy hair, tired brown eyes, and a stubborn spark of dignity that somehow refused to die. She had been sitting there for 3 hours. 3 hours since her son Mark left her on that bench with a promise he'd be back in just a few minutes. He said he had to handle something urgent. She believed him. She always believed him. Helen's stomach growled so loudly it embarrassed her, even though no one seemed to notice. She hadn't eaten since the day before, just a stale piece of bread she'd found in the kitchen trash before they left the apartment. Mark didn't leave her $1. He didn't even glance back. He walked away with his hands stuffed in the pockets of his dirty jeans, shoulders hunched like he was dragging a burden he'd finally decided to drop. People streamed through the park, office workers with coffee cups, tourists with cameras, students with earbuds, street vendors calling out deals. No one really looked at Helen, or if they did, they looked away fast, as if poverty was something you could catch. Helen closed her eyes and tried to remember when everything started falling apart. Maybe it was 5 years ago when her husband John died suddenly of a heart attack so fast there wasn't even time for a goodbye. Or maybe it started earlier when Mark lost his job at a factory and started drinking. At first it was beer on weekends, then liquor every day, and with the alcohol came rage. In the beginning it was sharp words, then yelling. Helen tried to calm him down. She cooked his favorite meals. She scrubbed the apartment until it shined. Nothing helped. Mark blamed her for everything, his father's death, his own bad luck, the life he thought he deserved but never got. When Helen got sick, things got worse. Diabetes first, then high blood pressure. Her prescriptions were expensive, and most of her Social Security check disappeared into medications and doctor visits. Mark complained she spent too much, that she was a drain, that she should just die already and let him live. Helen swallowed those words like poison, but she stayed because she was his mother, because she loved him, because some part of her still believed love could fix what anger had broken. A pigeon hopped near her feet, pecking at invisible crumbs in the gritty pavement. Helen watched it with envy. At least it was free. It could fly anywhere, anytime. As the sun disappeared behind buildings, the shadows stretched long across the park. Helen felt a tightness in her chest, not just fear, but certainty. Mark wasn't coming back. She knew it. She'd always known deep down that one day he would do exactly what he'd threatened so many times. He used to spit the words at her, he'd dump her somewhere and never return because she was useless, because she was in the way. Tears slipped down Helen's wrinkled cheeks. She didn't wipe them. She let them fall, soaking the faded cotton of her blouse. Her whole body ached. Her joints screamed from sitting so long. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but worse than the physical pain was the hollow collapse inside her chest, the feeling of being discarded like trash by the very child she carried, nursed, and raised. A young couple walked past, holding hands, laughing at something the man said. Helen watched them with a sting of nostalgia. She remembered being young like that, full of dreams. She met John at a neighborhood summer festival. He was handsome, hardworking, gentle. They married 3 months later. They rented for years before buying a small, modest home in Queens. Mark was born 2 years after the wedding. The pregnancy was hard, but the first time Helen held him, she felt every sacrifice was worth it. He was chubby, rosy-cheeked, with curious eyes. Helen devoted her entire life to him. She stopped working outside the home so she could raise him right. She baked and sold treats to help with bills, but her priority was always her son. Mark was bright, got good grades. Helen dreamed he'd go to college and build a better life. But after high school, he said he wanted to work and make money. He landed a job at a manufacturing plant and stayed nearly 15 years until the company shut down. That's when everything changed. Mark was 38 when he became unemployed. He tried temporary jobs, but nothing stuck. Frustration turned into bitterness. He married and divorced within the same year. His ex-wife said he drank too much and got aggressive. Helen tried to defend him, but deep down she knew it was true. Night fully swallowed the park. Streetlights flickered on, casting pale yellow circles on the ground. Helen started shaking, not from cold, even though the air had cooled, but from fear. Fear of what came next. Where would she go? How would she survive? She had no one. She was an only child. Her parents had been gone for decades. No siblings, no close cousins, no real friends left. The last years of her life had been spent trapped in the apartment taking care of Mark, enduring his explosions, trying to be the perfect mother he clearly didn't want. A middle-aged man approached the bench. Helen stiffened. He was tall, dressed simply but cleanly, with a backpack slung over one shoulder. He stopped a few feet away and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in foil. "Hi, ma'am," he said softly. "Are you okay?" Helen didn't answer. She just stared with exhausted, empty eyes. "I've seen you here for hours," he continued. "Are you waiting for someone?" my son, Helen whispered, voice rough from silence. "He said he'd be right back." The man's expression shifted sadness, the kind that comes from understanding. "Here," he said, holding out the sandwich. "You need to eat." Helen hesitated. Pride and hunger battled inside her. Hunger won. She took it with trembling hands. "Thank you," she breathed. The man offered a gentle smile. "My name is Robert. I volunteer around here, helping people who end up on the streets. If you need anything, I'm close by." Then, as if he remembered something, he added with a storyteller's rhythm, "And if this story is hitting you in the heart, subscribe and hit the like button so you don't miss more real-life stories like this. Tell us in the comments what city you're watching from." Helen ate like she hadn't tasted food in years. It was just bread, cheese, and deli meat, but in that moment it felt like salvation. Robert stayed beside her on the bench, not crowding her, just making it clear she wasn't alone anymore. When she finished, Helen finally looked at him properly. Robert was about 50, short gray hair, kind eyes behind simple glasses, a calmness that felt safe. "How long have you been here, Helen?" he asked. She blinked. "How do you know my name? I heard you tell a woman earlier when she offered you water." Helen didn't even remember that. Maybe her mind had been drifting too far away. "Since this morning," she said. "My son brought me here and said he'd be back." Robert sighed. He'd seen it too many times, elders abandoned in parks, bus stations, hospital waiting rooms. Cruelty still shocked him, even after years in volunteer work. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Helen shook her head and tears returned. "He was all I had. I took care of him my whole life. When his father died, I promised I'd never abandon him. And now he did this to me." Her voice cracked. Robert placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "This isn't your fault. You know that, right?" Helen wasn't sure. She'd been trained for years to believe everything was on her, his happiness, his anger, his failures. "There's a shelter not far from here," Robert said. "It's clean, decent. You can sleep safely tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out longer-term help." "What do you think?" Helen looked around the dark park. People were settling into corners with cardboard and blankets. The idea of staying outside terrified her. "Okay," she said. Robert helped her stand. Her legs were numb. She wobbled and would have fallen if he hadn't steadied her. "Slow," he told her. "No rush." They walked Robert, matching her pace with patience. Helen held her torn bag like it contained her entire world, because it did. The shelter was about 10 blocks away, but to Helen it felt like miles. Her feet hurt in worn-out sandals, and diabetes made every step burn. Still, she kept going. She had no choice. Along the way they passed closed storefronts, loud bars spilling music into the street, people asking for spare change, the city alive and indifferent, all at once. Robert told her he worked as a building doorman during the day. Nights and weekends he volunteered. He started after his own mother struggled. "My mom had Alzheimer's," he said. "In the end, she didn't recognize me, but I showed up every day. When she passed, I knew I needed to honor her by helping others." Helen listened quietly, her heart tightening. Robert had done what she always hoped Mark would do, show up. They reached the shelter at last, an old 3-story building with peeling paint but warm light in the windows. A sign by the door read, "Street Francis House." Robert rang the bell. A woman in her 60s opened short blonde hair, welcoming smile. "Robert, good to see you. Who's this?" "This is Helen. She needs a place for tonight." The woman's eyes softened. "Of course. Come in, sweetheart. I'm Sister Beatrice." Inside was simple but clean. A hallway lined with doors, the smell of fresh food drifting from the kitchen. "Have you eaten?" Sister Beatrice asked. "Just a sandwich Robert gave me. Then I'm making you something real." She guided Helen to a small dining room with mismatched chairs and wooden tables, returned minutes later with a steaming bowl of vegetable soup and 2 rolls. Helen ate slowly, savoring each spoonful, potatoes, carrots, squash warmth, spreading through her body like life returning. Sister Beatrice sat across from her as Helen told the whole story, the drinking, the cruelty, the abandonment. The words poured out like a dam breaking. When Helen finished, Sister Beatrice took her hands. "You can stay here as long as you need. Tomorrow we'll talk about your rights, social services, all of it. But tonight you rest." She led Helen to a small room upstairs with 4 single beds empty for now. Helen lay down on a thin mattress that felt like luxury compared to the park bench. Sister Beatrice covered her with a clean blanket. "Sleep, Helen? Tomorrow is a new day." Alone in the room, Helen stared at the cracked ceiling and thought about Mark. Was he home now? Did he feel guilt or relief? Tears came again, but this time something else rose with them, anger. Anger at wasting her life trying to earn love that never came. anger at shrinking herself into just a mother until there was nothing left of Helen. Yet beneath the anger was a thread of hope. Robert and Sister Beatrice proved there were still good people in the world. Helen finally fell asleep deeply for the first time in months. Morning arrived with sunlight spilling through the window. Helen woke disoriented, then remembered the bench, the abandonment, the shelter. She washed her face in the shared bathroom and barely recognized herself, dark circles, pale skin, hair wild. Downstairs, Sister Beatrice served coffee and simple breakfast to women carrying their own heavy stories. Afterward, she brought Helen into a small office with an old desk and a metal cabinet. "We need to stabilize your situation," Sister Beatrice said. "Do you receive Social Security?" "Yes." Helen nodded. "And where does the money go?" Helen lowered her eyes, ashamed. "My son. He withdrew it for me. He controlled everything." Sister Beatrice nodded like she'd heard it 100 times. "We'll help you regain access. Do you have your ID documents?" Helen's heart sank. Mark kept her paperwork at home. "They're in the apartment. Then we'll request replacements. And we'll call a social worker. We can also pursue a protective order. What he did, abandoning a vulnerable elder, is a crime." The idea of taking legal action against her own son made Helen's chest tighten, but another part of her craved justice. "I'll think about it," she whispered. "You don't have to decide today," Sister Beatrice said. "Just know you have options." That day became a blur of forms and phone calls. Helen realized how little she knew about her own finances because Mark had controlled everything. At lunch, Robert returned with a bag of donated clothes, pants, shirts, used sneakers in good condition, and hygiene items. Helen's eyes filled again. "Thank you," she said. "I don't even know how to repay you." "You don't," Robert replied. "Just get better." That afternoon, a social worker named Karen arrived, 40s hair in a tight bun, professional but kind. In private, Karen asked hard questions: how long Helen lived with Mark, whether there had been physical harm or only verbal abuse, whether she had been denied food or medicine. Helen told the truth about the yelling, the threats, the fear, the skipped medications because he complained about the cost. Karen's face grew serious. "Helen, you've experienced psychological abuse and neglect. That's extremely serious. We're opening a protection case." "I don't want to cause trouble for my son," Helen murmured. Karen leaned forward, steady eye contact. "He caused trouble for himself the moment he abandoned you in a public park. You deserve dignity and respect." Dignity, respect. Words Helen had forgotten could belong to her. Karen began the process for Helen to receive her Social Security, directly checked eligibility for additional benefits due to health issues, and started searching for a subsidized assisted living placement. "Assisted living," Helen repeated, startled. "Yes," Karen said. "Places where you can live with independence, but with support when needed. You won't have to stay in a shelter forever." Hope flickered, small, shaky, but real. Days passed. The shelter became routine coffee in the morning, helping with chores, quiet afternoons, reading donated books. That's when Helen met Connie, an 80-year-old woman with a sharp sense of humor. "So, you're the new one," Connie said, dropping onto the worn sofa beside Helen. "Welcome to the club of the thrown away." Helen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Connie kept talking. "My son ditched me too. At least he left me at a hospital, not a park." Connie's bluntness shocked Helen, but it also made her feel less alone. "How did you get past it?" Helen asked. Connie shrugged. "I stopped blaming myself. I worked like a dog, gave him everything, and he still turned out selfish. That wasn't my failure." Those words lodged deep in Helen's chest. Maybe she could believe them one day. A week later, Karen returned with news. Helen's direct access to her benefits was being restored. A replacement card would arrive soon. Then Karen said something that made Helen's hands shake. "I found you a spot in a good assisted living home in a quiet neighborhood. It's subsidized. You'd contribute about 30% of your monthly check and keep the rest for yourself." For the first time in years, Helen imagined having money she could actually use on her own needs, her own choices. The next day, Karen drove Helen to visit. The house was bright, painted a soft yellow with a small garden full of flowers out front. A coordinator named Martha welcomed them, toured them through common rooms with books and games, clean bedrooms, regular nurse visits, planned activities. It felt unreal, like stepping into a life Helen thought belonged to other people. "Would you like to move in?" Martha asked. Helen's throat tightened. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I would." When they returned to the shelter, Sister Beatrice handed Helen a box, new clothes, hygiene products, a warm coat, even new shoes. "A local church donated these," she said. "Robert told them you deserved to start fresh." Helen hugged the coat to her chest and sobbed, not from despair this time, but gratitude. A week later, Robert helped her move. Helen's belongings fit into one small suitcase. The ride was quiet, her nerves loud inside her. "It's going to be okay," Robert said. "You'll see. At the home, Martha led Helen to a cozy room. Her roommate Alice returned later that day, a warm, musical-voiced woman about Helen's age with silver hair and a bright smile. "You'll like it here," Alice promised. And Helen did. She joined activities, crafts, movie nights, garden walks, card games. She discovered she liked painting. She started taking her medications properly with help from a nurse. Her blood pressure improved. Her diabetes stabilized. But the biggest change was inside. Helen was living for herself. She bought a few outfits she actually liked. She got her hair cut for the first time in years. She wore a little lipstick, just enough to remind herself she still existed. Still, Mark haunted her thoughts at night. Then, 3 months after Helen moved in, Martha approached her with a serious expression. "Helen, someone is here asking for you." "Who? Your son?" Helen's blood ran cold. Mark stood in the visiting room, looking thinner, eyes sunken, beard scruffy, the faint smell of alcohol clinging to him even in daylight. "Mom," he rasped. Helen crossed her arms and waited. "I came to apologize," he said. Apologize, Helen's voice was sharp. 3 months later, he ran a hand through messy hair. "I was desperate. I wasn't thinking." Anger rose like fire. "So your solution was to leave me hungry on a park bench like garbage I was drinking," he pleaded. "Aye, you're always drinking. It's always something," Helen snapped. Mark's eyes filled with tears. "I'm trying to change. I stopped drinking. I found a job. I want to fix things." Helen let out a bitter laugh. "Fix what?" "Years of insults, the fear, the days without food, the medications I skipped because you screamed about money," Mark broke down. "You're my only family." Helen's voice cracked. "And you were the only family I had, and you threw me away." Silence. Then Mark said, "Come back home. I'll take care of you." Helen shook her head slowly, firmly. "I'm never going back." "But I'm your son," he said, desperate. Helen stared at him, the irony burning. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm choosing myself for the first time in my life." Mark begged for forgiveness. Helen breathed in, then answered with honesty. "I don't know if I forgive you. Maybe someday. But even if I do, it doesn't mean we go back to what we were. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened." As he left, Helen called after him once. "If you want to change, do it for you, not to pull me back into your mess. Get help. Stay sober. Go to therapy. Become better because you want to be better." Mark nodded and walked out. Helen trembled afterward, but in therapy she learned something important. Guilt often clings to survivors, especially when the abuser is family. Society teaches mothers they must forgive endlessly, but boundaries are not cruelty, they're survival. Months later, Helen received a letter from Mark, handwritten, no demands, no manipulation, just responsibility. He wrote that he'd been sober for months in treatment and therapy, finally owning his choices. He didn't ask to come home. He only said she deserved happiness. Helen read it 3 times, then sat quietly with the complicated piece of it. She eventually wrote back. She accepted his apology for her own healing, but the pain remained and her new life mattered. She wished him well and told him to keep doing the work. Meanwhile, Helen's world expanded. Robert invited her to help start a support group for abandoned seniors. Helen doubted herself, but she tried and found she had a gift for making people feel safe. The group grew, spread to other neighborhoods, and eventually became a real program. Helen began writing a blog called New Beginnings, telling her story to help others survive theirs. Messages poured in from across the country, people thanking her for giving them hope. She gave talks. She turned the blog into a book. She became, in a way she never imagined, an advocate. Years after being abandoned, Helen returned to Union Square with Robert and sat on the same bench. Only now she wasn't hungry and she wasn't alone. She had friends, purpose, peace, a chosen family. Somewhere out there, Mark was staying sober and serving community service after being held accountable in court for abandoning a vulnerable elder, and Helen felt no need to chase closure anymore. She had learned the deepest truth: the hardest way your story doesn't end when someone leaves you behind. Sometimes that's exactly where your real life begins. And if this story touched your heart, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which part moved you the most and what city you're watching from, because your voice matters here.